You're all very welcome to this Lunch and Learn session on emotional intelligence and how to develop and use these skills to future-proof yourself. But just wanted to say a massive thanks again to Saoirse and Christina and the whole team at Iconic Offices. I think this is a really great resource that they are providing by hosting these regular events. So I'm delighted to be able to be a part of that. So today, as I said, I'd like to get us thinking a little bit about what the future of work might look like, what kind of skills can help us manage it. I'm going to just be focusing on 5 skills and I'll identify why they might be valuable, some of the potential pitfalls or dangers to be aware of, and how to develop them. And I'll also be sending you a link which will give you access to a resource that you can download. So that'll just help you to develop yourself and it'll provide you with some tips on how to do that. So hopefully, I think you'll come away from this session with even just one little golden nugget of information, one slight shift in your thinking. Because all of this, it's really developed through incremental progress and small steps. So I suppose this webinar is kind of the first small step. So well done on making time for investing in yourself. Just to signpost as well, emotional intelligence, it's sometimes abbreviated to either EI or EQ. So EI obviously standing for emotional intelligence. EQ, that's similar to the way that IQ can be used to describe intelligence. EQ is for emotional intelligence. So just if you hear me using those terms, that's what I'm referring to. It's those skills, those social and emotional skills to help you understand, use, and manage your emotions and those of others in positive ways. I suppose before I jump into the content, I'll just introduce myself. My name's Julie. I'm an organizational psychologist, which basically means that I aim to improve how people experience work. And I'm the head of people development with Jigsaw Better Business. And we support great businesses to be better. So we do that through creative problem solving, digitization, and people development. And we've worked with hundreds of businesses across Ireland, literally butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. So no matter what kind of business you are, we've helped a lot of clients make improvements, reduce costs, increase their capacity. And I suppose as well as that, it's the less tangible benefits, like having more confidence in what you're doing, or getting home to your family on time, having that sustainable work-life balance. So that's a bit about what we do. If any of that is of any interest to you, feel free to get in touch. We can connect on LinkedIn. I'll be providing my contact details at the end of the session as well. So as Saoirse said, we are recording it. So the recording will be shared. So I suppose just bear in mind, if you do have your camera on or if you are contributing to the conversation, just share whatever you feel comfortable sharing. But do absolutely feel free to unmute yourself at any stage or pop questions, comments, anything like that into the chat. So I'll be having a look at the chat box. But as I say, do get involved. It can be absolutely as interactive as you like it to be. So as I said, I'm going to focus today mostly on emotional intelligence in terms of how that can help us in the future of work. And I'd like to just get us all thinking a little bit, what might the future of work look like to you? So pop your questions, or sorry, pop your ideas or comments into the chat there. When you visualize your workplace, say in 5 years down the line, of course, it can be difficult to predict it exactly, but what do you think we might be seeing more of, or what might we see less of? So feel free to pop ideas into the chat or unmute yourself if that's easier as well. Yeah, Matthias saying increased autonomy for employees. Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be something that a lot of people are looking for, is a bit more autonomy. More effective collaboration. Yeah, definitely. It's one that we're realizing, you can't just be working on your own. Hopefully not as office-based, more home working. Yeah, Beth, I think so. I think, we've really seen that shift very suddenly over the last 2 years. And yeah, Christina, emphasis on wellness. I think that's one that I'm really seeing a lot, is that companies are realizing it's not enough to just, it's not a nice to have your people being resilient and well. It's an absolute essential, I suppose, especially when, we're seeing a lot of people changing jobs. So yeah, definitely emphasis on wellness. Yeah, hybrid working life or work balance. Yeah, life work balance. Absolutely. more value to hybrid work. Yeah, so a lot of people mentioning that shifting it between it, instead of being purely based in one place, now we have people who are maybe coming in a couple of days a week, um 6 hour day or 4 day week. Yeah, absolutely, I've seen that, yeah, in Scandinavia at the moment, and in a lot of countries as well. A lot of companies are trialing that, the 4 day week, and seeing, can we be just as productive, and get that better work life balance. So yeah, absolutely. I think those are some trends, and you can keep those coming in. Bottom up contribution to teamwork, organization. Yeah, I think so. That idea that, it's not just, okay, we have the boss up at the top and they're telling you what to do. Recognizing that every team member can contribute regardless of, their seniority or their experience. So yeah, absolutely. I think those are really, really good inputs and good suggestions about what the future work might look like. Um, I've got a couple of, common themes that may come about. Obviously, with every workplace or every industry, it's going to be a bit different. But something that we've seen quite a lot and probably will continue to see is that rapid pace of change. There's a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability. And that means that hindsight doesn't really provide foresight. We can't rely solely on what worked in the past. That's like trying to drive a car forward while looking in your rearview mirror. We can't solely rely on what worked yesterday, because that might not work tomorrow. Diversity as well. We're seeing our workplaces becoming increasingly diverse. Age, we have people living longer, so they're working longer. Gender, we're seeing, women holding more senior leadership positions that they wouldn't have held in the past. And more cultural diversity as well. There's a lot more migration, globalization, and like we mentioned about remote working, you can have a team member in Europe or Asia or Africa or wherever else that you can easily meet up with, on a daily basis because of technology. So that ties in with the next one there about hybrid. Having teams that aren't all in the same place. So we're dealing with a lot of different people, and interacting with them in a lot of different ways. And automation or technology is going to, make some roles or tasks obsolete. Machines or robotics or software or artificial intelligence will replace certain jobs or certain tasks. But I suppose what sets us apart and what's harder to replace by technology is those skills, or are those skills that make us uniquely human. So it's those emotional and social skills, will help us to manage an environment like this. Okay, so obviously there are lots of other skills that will be relevant, but focusing solely just on emotional intelligence today. And again, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What does emotional intelligence mean to you? Because it's a term that's thrown around, and pop your thoughts into the chat box there. You saw this event and you saw emotional intelligence in the title. Why did that interest you? Why did you want to sign up to it? So let's see what you think. So Nina, being emotionally aware. Yeah, absolutely. So kind of aware of how you're feeling, being able to understand and interpret your own emotions. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. How people interact with each other. Yeah, so it's understanding yourself, understanding others, and being mindful of others' emotions as well as your own. Yeah, absolutely. So it's not putting, being able to tackle both of those, both your own emotions and others. How you deal with things, how you process things. Yeah, absolutely. So, when things get difficult, how do you behave? Being able to give a name to your and others' emotions. Yeah, so having that vocabulary or that language to describe how you're feeling or how someone else might be feeling. Understanding the impact of our reactions, being aware of other people. Yeah, this is really, really good. Positive mental health and wellness as well. So being able to manage stress or difficult emotions, and not being completely led by emotions. Exactly. Yeah, Caroline. It's, being aware of them, but knowing when to kind of take a step back and say, okay, that's my subjective impression, but what objectively exists. So not being completely led by emotions. Um, and yeah, Eddie, not bringing too many personal issues or emotions into the workplace. Yeah, it's kind of maybe knowing how to express it in a healthy way, rather than just ignoring it and leaving it at the door. But, being able to kind of have productive discussions or productive coping strategies for your personal issues. Yeah. Yeah. I think even, if you've ever gone to like a gym class or anything like that, and, if you weren't really feeling it, like you might have done what I usually do, which is put on energetic music, you kind of shift or alter your mood to perform at your best and to suit the environment. And you might have to do that as well when you're going into a meeting or having a difficult conversation with someone. You understand and manage and adapt your mood to suit the situation. So yeah, I think those are really, really good comments. Yeah, and Julie, you're just saying being able to centralize your emotions, deal with the fight or flight responses, exactly, because they're always going to be there. They keep us safe and they're necessary, but yeah, it's knowing when to or how to manage them. Yeah. So those are really good. I think people have quite a good understanding or an awareness of emotional intelligence, which is great. This definition there from this guy, Reuven Bar-On, he's saying that it's interrelated emotional and social competencies that determine how effectively we understand and express ourselves, understand others and relate with them, and cope with daily demands. And you'll notice there it says competencies. These are skills and they can be developed. So while you may have some innate abilities or preferences that might help you or might hinder you in some situations, they are skills and they can all be developed. Just a very brief bit of history. That guy, Reuven Bar-On, he was one of the first people to look into and to measure emotional intelligence. That was back in the 80s. I think sometimes people think of emotional intelligence as, a fad or a new concept, but actually, it's been around for quite a while. So that yeah, he was working with the Israeli army, and he was discovering that what sets the best soldiers apart wasn't purely just physical strength, but it was also the mental strength to cope with the extreme challenges that they faced. And there's another definition there from Travis Bradbury, and he's saying that emotional intelligence, it's that something in each of us, and it's a bit intangible. It affects how we manage behavior, navigate social complexities, and make personal decisions that achieve positive results. So that really all ties in with what everyone was saying in the comments there, which is great. Research has shown that these skills are really valuable for improving your work performance, especially in roles that are socially and emotionally demanding. So it's not a silver bullet. It's not like it's going to automatically fix everything. You do also need technical skills. You need to be good at your job as well. But these skills are really valuable whenever it comes down to managing emotions or managing other people, right? Which is something that I think every role will have to an extent. Everyone's going to deal with problems, trying to solve solutions, deal with stress or pressure, deal with other people. It's something that we're all going to be using. And in the future of work that we kind of visualized there briefly, we were saying that we'll be dealing with change and uncertainty. We'll be dealing with a lot of different people who might see the world very differently to us. We might be dealing with a lot of different kinds of technology. And we're trying to ensure that we stay human while technology replaces some of the roles or tasks that we do. And so I've identified 5 skills, emotional intelligence skills, that I believe really tie in with addressing those kinds of challenges. The first one is flexibility, which is that ability to be adaptable, to react to change without being too rigid in our thinking or our actions. Empathy, which is a skill of putting yourself in someone else's position, listening to them, and really trying to recognize how they might be feeling. And it's not about agreeing with them. Empathy isn't endorsement. It's just about trying to understand their point of view. Self-awareness as well, it's the will and skill to see yourself accurately. So someone who's skilled at this They have a good sense of their, their own emotions, how they're feeling in a moment, their values and what motivates them. And they probably have a good balancing act between, they know their strengths and they know their areas for development, right? They don't think they're perfect, but they don't think that they're useless, so they're aware of the two sides of it. Problem solving as well. This is the skill of recognizing a problem, addressing it, and coming up with potentially effective solutions. So it's about trying to not allow our emotions to completely cloud our judgment and get in the way. And so I think someone mentioned that in the comments as well. So, sometimes we might spend more time worrying about a problem rather than trying to solve it. So someone who's skilled with this is able to recognize how they're feeling, but take a step back from that as well in order to solve a problem. And then optimism. So that's that belief that things will work out and that you'll be able to manage them. And it's not just that blind, Irish, sure, it'll be grand, that kind of typical approach, but it's about really believing that you have the skills and the resources to overcome challenges. Or if you don't have those now, that you will in the future. So I'm just going to go through each of these and identify the value of them, the potential pitfalls or things to be aware of, and then strategies on how to begin to develop them. And these are skills that you're probably using already, but they're skills that can always be developed because as our world just keeps changing, we need to be able to change with it. We need to make sure that those skills are really up to date. Okay, so the first one is flexibility. So why is this relevant? Well, as we mentioned, there's likely going to be a lot of change and uncertainty in our world, and there has been a lot, and it'll likely continue. So being flexible means that you can adapt to that, and it's not just oh sure, I can change the time of that meeting to suit you. That's a form of flexibility. But what we're talking about here as well is adapting your thoughts, your behaviors, your actions to suit the environment. And it'll also help you work well with other people. So we mentioned that piece about diversity and working well with other people. It'll show them that you're open to hearing their views. You're willing to suit their needs as well. It's not just going, all right, it's my way or the highway. So it's about kind of being able to adapt to your surroundings or your environment, a bit like a chameleon. And a potential obstacle here or a potential challenge is you can be seen as too flexible. Sometimes people might think if you're constantly changing your mind or your approach, people could see that as being disingenuous. Harvard Business Review have a really interesting article. It's called The Authenticity Paradox. And it kind of captures this because, I suppose people talk about being true to themselves and being authentic, and that's really important. Obviously, we want to feel like we're being genuine. But sometimes if we rigidly stick to that, it can get in the way of us developing ourselves. So it can get in the way of maybe managing different cultures or adapting to suit the environment. And in that article, The Authenticity Paradox, they tell this anecdote of a guy called George, and he's Malaysian. He works in a Malaysian company, and then that company gets acquired by a Dutch multinational, and their decision-making process is really different. So that the culture is kind of changing. And then this guy, George, feels like he has to choose between being a failure or being a fake. So it's a really difficult balancing act. And unfortunately, I'm not going to go on to the next slide and say, oh, here's how to solve that. There's no real right answer. There's no one size fits all approach. But I think it's just important to be aware of that balancing act and be aware of knowing your own natural preferences. I think that's a first step in terms of developing this skill because we all have natural preferences. Some of us on the call, get really bored with routine, right? And you might love change and variety and novelty. Other people, whenever there's a bit of change, it can really stress us out or worry us. And a lot more people probably are somewhere in between those two examples. Maybe you're comfortable with some change. So if you begin by just recognizing how you usually think and feel about change, and once you know that, you can know when to adapt a bit. So say, for example, if you are someone who's really flexible, know when you need to slow things down or when to stand your ground or, stick to your convictions, maybe practicing that a bit more often. If you're someone who is quite rigid and you don't really like change, try to experiment a bit and go outside of your comfort zone, and try, try new things, try to be creative, switch up your routine, look for a new idea or do a new action. So trying something a bit different, and thinking, asking yourself, okay, if I'm about to choose this path, what would a devil's advocate say? What would be an issue that I haven't thought of? So just trying to get that cognitive flexibility and that ability to think and act a little bit differently. Okay, so that's the first piece there about flexibility. The second one we mentioned was empathy. So why is this important? Well, curiosity and empathy are really, really important skills when it comes to managing diversity and creating an inclusive environment. So it's about being able to recognize, okay, that person sees the world very differently, and I'd like to learn more about that difference, rather than saying, that's not how I would do it, therefore I don't like it, or therefore it's wrong. So it's being able to kind of be curious rather than judging. And it also helps to create a psychologically safe environment. And this is a climate where people feel comfortable to speak their minds, without being worried that they're going to be blamed or embarrassed or ridiculed. And when we have this kind of environment, it's really valuable for creativity and innovation. So obviously it'll allow, teams or teams and companies to stay competitive and adapt. And it also helps you to understand your customers. You need to be able to listen. And that's why I've got a picture there of headphones. A really big part of empathy is just listening without responding or without providing, judgment or evaluation or advice. Now, a potential downside or danger here is that empathy can be really tiring. So if you are constantly feeling the emotions of other people, there is that potential for us to get really worn down. And we see that in professions, where people are caring for a living, like in, nursing or things like that. People can get really burnt out and worn down from all the empathy, basically. And another thing is that empathy can be biased. Naturally, it's easier for us to relate and feel empathy towards people who are similar to us. So if you're not aware of that, you might think, yeah, I'm really empathetic, but actually maybe it's more so to people that are similar to you. And when it comes to people that are different or people you disagree with, maybe you're disadvantaging them. So those are a couple of things to be mindful of when it comes to developing empathy. Um, I mentioned there the piece about, trying to cultivate more curiosity rather than judgment. So it could be about a person you don't know. Maybe it's someone with a different cultural or language background. You might see the world very differently to them. You don't have to agree with them. That's okay. It's not, empathy isn't endorsement, but you can aim to understand and just explore it non-judgmentally. Um, the second piece is about practicing active listening. So this is where you really put the other person first. You try to minimize any distractions and you just focus on what they're saying. And it's trying to pause. I think the tricky thing is, we often listen to respond rather than listen to understand. So it's about trying to suspend that desire to evaluate or judge or advise. Okay, so it's trying to, that's a tricky one. I think, so say, if I was to give you an example, say your partner comes home and they say, oh, I had the worst day, I didn't get that promotion that I wanted, and then on the way home, I got a speeding ticket, right? So if you say something like, oh, that's such a shame, but look at it this way, at least you have a job, John next door lost his job last month and he's still struggling, he's still looking for work, so it could be worse. That's not an empathetic response. It might be true in that situation, but it's not empathy. And similarly, if you said, oh, don't worry, you're really smart, you're hardworking, I'm sure another opportunity will come up for you. Again, it might be reassuring, it might be nice, but it's not empathetic because it's you giving your judgment or your evaluation. So if you really want to just be empathetic, it might just be a case of, oh God, sounds like you've had a horrible day. You must be feeling really fed up, and I think that kind of goes against some of our natural preferences because we want to solve the problem with someone. We want to make them feel better. but rarely does a response change the difficult situation. So what makes things better is connection. So that's what we're at so far in terms of empathy and flexibility. If anyone has any questions on any of those so far, just want to check in, pop them into the chat. Um, and I've just seen a comment there. Yeah, so Matthias saying, interesting about you were in the Air Force and you're being told that the mental state is just as important, if not more, than physical strength. Yeah, so they really, and like that's really coming into, in sports psychology or, everything else. A lot of people are realizing that about the mental side of performance there. Yeah. Okay, so I'll keep working away, but if you do have any questions, please do pop them into the chat. The next one I have there is self-awareness. So this is that third skill. So why is this important? Well, in order to understand your emotions, that will help you to understand your environment. Emotions are data. They give us information about what is going on around us. So being aware of yourself can help you just manage that a bit better, and it can help you manage others as well, to be a bit more aware of them. It also helps you, if you know your values, it can help guide you through difficult times. If you really know this is what gets me up out of bed in the morning, that can get you through times when you're experiencing setbacks. And it also allows you to lead with authenticity, to be authentic, to be genuine, and for people to know where they stand with you. So that really ties in with what I was saying earlier about the flexibility. I think that this skill and flexibility go quite well together. Because a downside, I suppose, of being very self-aware is when you stick really rigidly to it. When you're thinking, look, this is who I am, take it or leave it, rather than trying to meet people in the middle or think win-win. Okay, so that's the potential obstacle there. So I think that once you're leading with self-awareness, you can be explicit with others as well. You can say something like, "Oh, look, I know I've been told I'm very assertive, so do call me out on it." Or, I'm trying to work on not interrupting people, so remind me, do remind me if I interrupt you. And again, that can be great if for, managing conflict or avoiding conflict. It kind of disarms people as well. It can break down barriers. You just, you're able to say what you mean because you know who you are. And I've got that image there. This really requires reflection. It's taking time out to think about who you are, or even thinking of your own kind of emotional triggers. Like if you say, okay, I really lost my cool there today, what happened, what led to that, and then for future, okay, that's a sensitive point for me, or something like that. So that's a big point on how to develop self-awareness. First is just paying attention in the present moment on purpose. So that's, I think, some people on the call probably practice mindfulness, but even just being mindful, some of the time, like mindful eating or going for a walk where you're not listening to anything, you don't have headphones on, you're just paying attention in that present moment. Or even going to the window, looking out the window and trying to see something that you've never seen before. That's just taking the time to pay attention in the present moment and notice how you're feeling. Because when we are in our busy day-to-day lives, that can get forgotten. And that can, we don't realize until it's too late, oh, I'm actually really upset or frustrated about something. And you can't even really pinpoint why, because you've been rushing through from one thing to the next. So it's about just noticing how you're feeling. And someone mentioned in the chat about having the language for, labeling your emotions. But if you don't have, at the moment, if you don't have the words to articulate how you're feeling or to explain it to yourself, you could even try just using numbers. Okay, so you could even give this a go. Just grab a piece of paper and think, on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your energy? With 10 being really energetic and 1 being just really low energy right now. So maybe take a second and just jot down, where am I right now in terms of my energy, scale of 1 to 10. And then in terms of your mood, how comfortable or pleasant is your mood? So again, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is really pleasant and comfortable mood, or one being really uncomfortable or unpleasant mood. And I'm not saying, good or bad, because I don't think there's any bad emotions. There's no wrong way to feel, because again, emotions are telling us something about our environment. But it's, some emotions are more or less pleasant or comfortable to us. So yeah, jot down two numbers there, and you might be thinking then, okay, if you are low energy and low mood, you might be feeling a bit sad. If you're high energy but the mood is unpleasant, it might be angry or anxious. If you're high energy and a pleasant mood, you're probably quite excited or energized. Or if you're low energy and the mood is comfortable or pleasant, you're probably just content, right? So it's about, being able to just take a moment to pause and reflect. And that's a big part as well, just reflecting. So even if you set your intention at the start of the day and then check in with yourself at the end of the day, and did you do what you wanted to do? Did you show up how you wanted to show up? Mm, And it's just reflecting non-judgmentally, but being kind to yourself while also taking responsibility. And the third point there is about getting feedback. Ask people whose opinions you value, how did they view you? And it's not that their opinion is going to be right or wrong. Sometimes people think, oh God, I thought I was really, flexible, but it turns out I'm not. It's not that necessarily that you're not, but it's just then interesting to say, okay, well, if this is how I thought I see myself and this is how someone else sees me, how might you close that gap? Where's that difference coming from? Um, so just popping into looking at the chat, as a frontline manager, what tools can I use to safeguard my well-being? That's a really good question, Caroline. I think I might come back to that at the end if that's okay. But yeah, it's a really important point in terms of your empathy. And I think, yeah, having those boundaries will be really important. So I'm going to come back to that, and the piece about empathy and safeguarding your own energy. And yeah, Matthias just saying there, solving conflicts, a conflict at least has two sides and often more. So they should always be solved by considering a bigger picture, listening to what everyone is involved. Yeah, rather than, and then develop a resolution based on this. Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, it's taking that bigger picture view. Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. So I'll just keep going along then to the fourth skill there, which is problem solving. And why is this valuable? Well, in this age of information, we have so much access to info that's so readily available. Not all of it is accurate or true. So we need to be able to kind of sift through and make sense of the world around us. So it's about recognizing your own biases, your own emotions, and recognizing that those can color how we interpret information. And, we see the world as we are, not as it is. So we do see the world through a particular lens. So problem solving, it's that ability to recognize our own biases and our own emotions, and then trying to take a step back and see what objectively exists as well. A potential pitfall here, in terms of if this was a well-developed skill, something to be mindful of is, if you can sometimes then rely on it too much, you could jump straight into problem-solving mode without, like you said, Matthias, in the comments, without maybe looking at the bigger picture. So you might jump straight into implementing solutions without fully surveying or fully understanding the situation. Another potential pitfall here is we tend to confuse good outcomes with good decision making. So if you've just sort of tried to solve a problem and it worked out well, you might think, brilliant, I'm a great problem solver. Or vice versa, maybe just a bit of bad luck happened and it didn't go well, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your problem solving skills weren't effective. So that's something else to be mindful of. And as well as that, in our complex world that's constantly changing, sometimes we can go, oh, well, I'll rely on that solution that I had from last year, and that'll work the same again this year. That might not be the case. Something that might have worked yesterday might not work tomorrow. So it's about constantly being able to adapt the problem solving strategies and solutions. So how do we go about improving this? Well, one way is to think, to know when you need to rethink, because you're probably going to need to rethink. Again, things are constantly changing, so you're going to need to be rethinking. But you need to know when to do that, because we don't want to be spending, so much time on every single problem. Sometimes there's a small problem that needs a quick solution. Other times it'll need a lot more thought and effort. So what you can ask yourself there is, how important or reversible is the decision? So if this problem you're trying to solve, or if this decision you're trying to make is very important, maybe it affects a lot of people, and if the consequences can't be reversed, you need to do all your rethinking upfront. You need to really analyze and think, okay, let me make sure I'm making the best possible decision that I can make before you make it. But if it's a situation where it's less important, maybe it doesn't affect too many people, and or the consequences aren't very permanent, then what you could do is make the decision and then use hindsight to redo it if you need to. So you kind of come back and evaluate, was that the best choice? Let me try and redo it if I need to. Okay, so you will need to rethink it, but just knowing when to do that. Remind yourself that you're not objective. Your way of viewing the problem is one way, but you have experiences and emotions and biases that'll influence your judgment. And you're also designed not to notice that. So we're kind of designed to be blind to our blindness, unfortunately. So just remind yourself to question things and ask other people, what am I missing here? What's a different way of viewing the situation, because I'm not objective. And this third one as well, it might sound simple, but just creating a list, just take a small bit of time to outline your possible options and then your reasons for your choice. That can be really helpful for problem solving, because sometimes we lack confidence in our decision making abilities, or we worry about the consequences. But if you have a list, you can come back to it and know that at that time, with the information that you had, you made the best decision that you possibly could. It can also be helpful if you tend to be a bit more impulsive, because it means that you're slowing yourself down. You can pause and think about it before diving into it. Okay, and as well, like I mentioned, we often confuse good outcomes for good decision making, and vice versa. So having that list allows you to come back to it and say, was my process good, or should I change anything there? And yeah, I can see a comment there about, don't think we're ever 100% objective, regardless of how hard we try. Yeah, exactly. I think it's just natural. Our brains are constantly trying to take shortcuts. It's like a big, powerful computer. We're trying to save power all the time. So it is something to be aware of. And so we'll just go on then to the fifth skill, which is optimism. And again, I think sometimes people don't think of this as a skill. They sometimes think, oh, I'm pessimistic or I'm optimistic, and that's who I am. But again, I do think it is a skill, and it can help you future-proof yourself, because you can then believe that things are possible, and you can progress through challenges. So without it, you might be more likely to give up or to burn out. It's having that belief, as I mentioned, that you can manage challenges, that you have the resources, you have the ability to figure things out. And I think a story that illustrates that quite well is a guy called Roger Bannister. So in 1954, he was the first person to run a mile in under 4 minutes. And prior to him doing that, people thought it was impossible. But after he did it, in 18 months after it, it was achieved by 39 other runners. So I think that really just illustrates, seeing something as possible can completely change the way you go about things. Optimism, it's not about just being naive and putting on rose-tinted glasses, but it's about seeing something as possible, and believing that you'll get through those hard times. Now, the possible downside is that blind optimism. Sure, it'll be grand. I'm not really assessing risks or threats. People might see you then as a dreamer, or you've got your head in the clouds and you're not really grounded in reality. So it is good to have a hopeful vision, to be optimistic, but it's also about being aware of how to make that future success more likely. So what is within your control so that you can make it more likely rather than just hoping for the best. So how do we develop this? Well, one way is to just think about how we talk about something. So noticing your language. If you think about someone else succeeding at something, would you say something like, "Oh God, I'd never be able to do that," or "Oh, well, that's fine for them, but I'm different. I'll always be the way that I am." That kind of thinking might be holding you back. If you're ever thinking something like, "Oh, well, I'm very unlucky. Nothing ever goes my way, so this will probably go wrong." It's just about noticing that and thinking, how else could you phrase that? If something didn't work in the past, that's fine. How can you do it differently so that the outcomes will be different? And just reminding yourself that, those things like saying always and never, again, they can limit us sometimes, because nothing really is permanent. No emotion or setback or challenge or conflict, nothing stays the exact same forever. So it's just about thinking, right, what's the worst that can happen and how likely is that outcome? And if it's likely, how do I prepare for it and, be ready for it when it does come about, if the worst case scenario happens. Okay, so those are the 5 skills that I believe are really useful for future proofing yourself. I will say that unfortunately with emotional intelligence, there's no silver bullet. It's not a case of, oh, just do these 3 steps and then you'll automatically improve. Everyone is going to have different strengths, different environments. So, I've provided a few strategies. Some of those might work for you, some of them might not. So it's up to you to really decide, which areas do I want to work on the most? And then what kind of small steps can I take to get me towards that goal? I think that it can be, a bit discouraging sometimes for people, but that they kind of want to be like, just tell me how to do it. But I will send you on some resources to help. And if you would like to have a call anytime to discuss things further, I'd be more than happy to. So I think Saoirse will pop in a link to my Calendly link, and you can book in a session and just have a bit of a chat. So as I say, it may be your first step. It might be you're just refreshing your knowledge and you've done a lot of work on this before. But it is always valuable to have a chat about it and practice these skills and see things a little bit differently. So when it comes to developing these skills, a simple way to do it is just pick one of them and think, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I now? Right? Where 10 is I'm absolutely nailing it, and 1 is I haven't a clue. I don't ever use this skill. So say, for example, if you're saying, all right, I'm at a 6 out of 10 for flexibility. So what does that really look like? And then what would it look like if you were up 1 point? If you were at a 7 out of 10, what would be different? What would you be doing differently? What would other people notice? And once you've identified that, it's just, what are some tiny steps that you can take to get there? So it's not about going from, 0 to 100. It's about just taking those tiny little steps, just doing something differently, one thing differently tomorrow, something else the next day, really small steps. And something that I'm going to send, and Saoirse has popped it into the chat there. You can see it's the forum.jotform.com, is this template, right? This resource. And I've created this for you to be able to download, just to help you a bit with your own development and your own reflection. So I've got, a couple of tips for each of the skills up at the top half. And then on the bottom, there's space for you to think about your own self-rating and how you might reflect on it. And within that document, there is descriptions for each of them, for each of those activities. So it'll allow you to to understand a couple of strategies and to reflect a little bit more. So feel free to just click that jot form link and you will be brought to a form that will just allow you to tick that you're interested. There is also, I just included a bit of space for if you did want to provide any feedback. It's always useful for me to have, but that is optional. So if you had any suggestions of what you liked or what you didn't like about today, I'd love to hear them, but you don't have to in order to get this resource. Okay. And then just a couple of final little tips is first one there in terms of developing these skills is keep it few, keep it manageable. So the more goals you take on, the less likely you are to succeed with everything. So taking those tiny manageable steps, just focusing on one area at a time. The second one is this small but mighty word, yet. I'm a big fan of that because it can really change the meaning of a sentence. You know, if you think about saying, I can't do it, you're saying you're defeated. But if you're saying, I can't do it yet, it shows that with time and effort, you'll eventually get there. So just bear that in mind. You know, don't be saying, oh, I'm no good at that, I'm not flexible, or I'm never going to be as empathetic as my colleague. You know, instead just saying, all right, I'm not where I'd like to be yet, but I have some skills and I'm going to work on developing them. Okay, so trying not to put yourself down, but just adding in that word yet can mean that you believe you will get there in time. And another tip is creating these if then statements. So this is allowing you to prepare for situations that you know will be challenging by creating these if then statements. So for example, say if you have noticed or you've gotten feedback that you often interrupt people in meetings, you might say, right, if I feel the need to interrupt in a meeting, then I will wait, I will write down what I have to say and I will wait until that person has finished talking. And just preparing those little statements can mean that you're not as reactive in the moment. Again, it might sound simple or it sounds straightforward, but putting the time and effort in before you go into a stressful or a difficult situation means that you have the preparation there. You're less likely to falter or forget about it. And I've just popped this graphic up as well because I think that when it comes to developing any skill, there is an element of taking those steps outside of our comfort zone, which feels uncomfortable and we tend not to enjoy it. And for that reason, that can mean we retreat back into where we feel safe and in control. But just as a reminder that that discomfort shows that learning is happening. So try not to be too afraid of it if that occurs. If you do want any further information, so I've taken 5 skills from this EQI 2.0 model of emotional intelligence. So it's a framework and it provides a common language because, as we mentioned, emotional intelligence can be a little bit intangible. So this is just a scientifically validated framework. You can complete an assessment and it produces a report that's customized to your own results. So if it is something that you're interested in, I can share more information on that and do absolutely drop me an email or you know, connect on LinkedIn or follow that jot form link or anything like that. And I'll be able to get in touch to chat about it if you're thinking, yeah, I'd like to go to the next step. So